Hi, everybody, and welcome to another Art Stewart & Co. virtual tasting. Joe Stewart here with my dad, Rob Stewart, and we're here to talk about the Red Wine Club, and specifically the wines that are going to be in the first shipment for the Red Wine Club going out in just a couple of weeks. We're shooting this in late February, but those club shipments should be coming out in the first couple weeks of March, so let's get acquainted with these wines. If you're a red wine lover, this is the club for you. But it's not just Pinot Noir, as we're starting out with our 2014 Duvet Tempranillo.
Yeah, what's interesting, Joe, about this particular club is we have three different vintages of reserve wines. The 2014 Duvet, the 2017 Vignette, and the 2016 Menefee. So it's kind of fun being in this club. Let's talk about the Duvet. Now, why are we even messing around with the Tempranillo?
In the Willamette Valley.
In the Willamette Valley. Now, this fruit comes from a vineyard that was started by a couple, Mike and Patty Green, and not the Patricia Green that you might think of, but a real Mike and a real Patty Green. And they, Duvet means two greens. So that's where the name comes from. There's only a half an acre of this fruit, and sadly they sold the vineyard 2 years ago, so this is probably the last that you'll see of the Duvet vineyard from us. But I made this in a style that if you're familiar with Spanish wines, Tempranillo is the grape of Rioja, which is a very hot and dry area, and there's a style called Crianza, which spends the fruit is made into wine, and then it spends about 2 years in the barrel. So this is made in that style. It's very spicy, very classic Spanish, nice high-end wine. So you get some spice and some zip.
You can even kind of tell it off the nose.
You get sort of that pie cherry, good acidity, and it's acid that brings food and wine together, which is kind of fun. I think of some classic dishes. I mean, when you think of Spain, you think of paella. This would be awesome with paella. We were just talking about an Israeli dish. I think this would be good with it. It's called shakshuka, which has a lot of tomato, salt,
pepper, eggs,
stuff like that in it. And think of anything that you might use harissa spice in. This would be awesome with that. It's a little lower in acid than most Pinot Noir, but it's not so low. And that has to do with how we make the wine. We were very careful about protecting that acidity through the whole production cycle. Lovely, lovely.
So moving on now to the 2017 Vignette Pinot Noir. And the Vignette's an interesting wine because it's a blend, but it's not quite to the level of seriousness of the reserve wines, but still a very strong and, sturdy red wine.
Well, Joe, I like to call it a baby reserve because it has reserve. It's the components in it are all from reserve vineyards. The intent here was to make a Pinot Noir that had more of a round, juicy middle palate. And so we looked at the vineyards that were warmer sites, and the three that come to mind very quickly, and that's what's in this, are Hershey Vineyard, which is in the Yamhill Carlton appellation. It's the warmest site we deal with, and you get lots of cherry and round middle palate. Fair amount of tannin, but polymerized tannins, which are soft and round. It's about 33% Daffodil Hill, which is also the vineyard that we, with partners, purchased in 2018, and it's an estate vineyard, if you will. Has very lush, round black cherry, fennel, thyme, and sort of a dusty earth component. And then Elkhorn Ridge, which is also it's in the Willamette Valley. It doesn't have a sub-appellation. But it's a very warm site, similar soils, marine sediment soils, just like the Hershey Vineyard, and due south facing. So very warm. You get plum and some cinnamon kind of spices out of it. So this is a wine that when you put it in your mouth, you immediately get that round middle palate. There's a decent amount of tannin, but it's not tannic. and not as much acidity, but that's how we make the middle palate seem more rounded, if you will. I would compare this with there's a dish called chicken moringa, which has a lot of tomatoes and mushrooms in it. Also, a goat cheese and mushroom tart. Those are the kind of things that I think of when I have this wine with me. You get that black cherry and then the red cherry and in the middle, structural middle palate. Yeah, very much.
It's almost a bit of a beginner's red wine. You know, if you're somebody that, you know, has maybe never really wanted to take the full dive into really sturdy Oregon Pinots, this is maybe a great starter for that type of person.
It is because of that round middle palate. It's by no means a simple wine, but it just has, you know, that appeal that you never liked Pinot Noir before because it's thin and acidic, and for a lot of reasons people don't like Pinot Noir. But when they have something like this from the Willamette Valley, that fruit and that roundness, then they go, I got it.
Yeah. So moving on to the 2016 Menefee, and this is one of your reserve wines. And this one will also be available in the Reserve Club and the Classic Club. So we got a lot of access to the 16 Menefee because it is just that great. We want as many people as possible to try it here as it moves into a few years past its original vintage.
Mm-hmm. So what's interesting, 2014 was very hot and intense, and it was the year that it's said that everybody wins because the banker wins, the grower wins, the winery wins, and the customer wins. Lots of fruit and very ripe. 17, which is the Vignette, was more what I call a classic, not necessarily the reasons. I mean, the weather was all over the map, but it was never really extremely hot. We had our normal 85 degree summer days with our 45, 50, maybe 55 degree nights. So 17 is what I think of when I say the old days. You know, go back 20 years. Was kind of what the vintage was like. 16 was interesting. It was the earliest vintage we've had in a long time. Some people actually started picking in August. We were done before October, and usually I don't even start till October. So what happened, it wasn't particularly hot. It was warm, but not extremely hot like 2014 and 2015. But what we saw is very early bud break, very early bloom, and the weather was just beautiful, not extremely hot. Actually, during bloom, what happened is there was a little smattering of precipitation here and there, and that caused, on the cluster, you had big berries and little berries. So those little berries gave you much more concentration. So any wine from the 16 vintage, you get lots of intense fruit in that middle palate. It's very attractive, especially when they're young. It's all about the fruit. For people that don't know what an aged Pinot Noir will be like, this will be one to watch, but you'll like it immediately. And it's that juicy middle palate that you get from 16. Now, Menefee specifically, I've never seen blueberry in the aromatics in any other wine I've ever had or made. And I think of those summer days picking wild blueberries in New Hampshire in the summertime, which we used to do in the summertime, or Maine. And it's the wild blueberry, not the ones you buy in the market that are big and round. These are the little tiny ones that are concentrated. You get that and a blackberry component to it. Two other things about the Menefee vineyard is it's lighter in color than the others, but if you close your eyes, you won't think it's light in color because there's this very silky middle palate that runs across your tongue. And then there's a little decent acidity on that. This vineyard happens to be in the southeast facing slope of the coastal range on the very western edge of the Willamette Valley, actually the Yamhill Carlton appellation. And so it's a little cooler site, and that has an influence on the color but also on the acidity. I like this one also. Think of anything with mushrooms and tomatoes. That mushroom tomato kind of tart thing. Delicious. I love that silkiness. I also enjoy it. I imagine this with kebabs, that you're not spicing up too much with other flavors as much as you're letting the very high quality lamb or a little bit of beef or chicken or shrimp. It's that grilling, but not overtly spiced out with something else. It's the main protein that carries the flavor.
Which means, it's a very complimentary wine. With, not like you said, when you pair this with a dish, it does not have to be a complicated dish.
No.
And it's something that can match up with a lot of different types of proteins and meats and whatever else you want to throw on the grill. So again, this is our Red Wine Club. It is the 2016 Menefee Pinot Noir, the 2014 Duvet Tempranillo, and the 2017 Vignette Pinot Noir. They'll be coming out in a couple months, or in a couple weeks, I beg your pardon, with our first Wine Club shipment of the year. And if you can find out more about all these wines and all of our Wine Club options at ourstuartandco.com. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.